Welcome back to In the Spotlight, the weekly football show that takes you on a nostalgic journey through the footballing years whilst also covering current hot topics. From forgotten Barclays men and iconic matches to player spotlights and fixture histories, we intend to cover it all within the sport we all love. My name is Junior Parado and I'm joined today by my brilliant co-host Matt Jessup. Matt, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm very well. How are you doing?
I'm good, man. I'm good. I can't believe we're on the third episode of In the Spotlight already. I'm looking forward to it.
Getting to the Christmas season as well, which obviously a very fun time for football. So you best believe you'll get treated with a lot of content over that period. But yeah, looking forward to
Absolutely.
getting into it.
Sweet, let's do it. So Monday takes us into a player spotlight and we head over to Italy where Lazio host Inter Milan. But we're going to be looking at a specific Lazio player, and that is Pedro, the Spanish winger, now 37, but he is aging like a fine wine. Really, he's been a really big player for Lazio this season. I think he's got 6 goals in 17 games, helping them go to the top of the Europa League table. He's also helped Lazio become they're involved in a top of the table clash, a battle for the title, which Inter Milan are also involved in. I think five teams are separated by 5 points. But yeah, just Matt, what are your thoughts on Pedro, his career, and kind of the longevity of a player of that quality?
Pretty amazing. I mean, the fixture itself, we'll go into very, very briefly, is a huge, huge one. And as you mentioned, that Serie A title race, we mentioned it with Atalanta a few weeks ago, and it's not stopped continuing and being pretty special. But as for Pedro, I mean, you talk about the longevity of the man, and it is amazing to see, at Chelsea, I thought he was a really handy, really useful player, sometimes a squad player, like very dependable, very technically gifted. Obviously, at Barcelona, I mean, you don't come through Barcelona, particularly at that time, without being half all right at football, and obviously spending 7 years there, making 204 appearances. You look at those like important players for Barcelona, or those important forwards, him, Alexis Sanchez, David Villa, and, excluding obviously the likes of Messi and whatnot. You're talking about players who have had pretty unbelievable careers and have provided a brilliant service to wherever they've gone. And that's no different for Pedro. And I think what you're seeing nowadays is you're seeing a lot of players who maybe, struggled with injuries earlier on in their career, but in general are like performing almost at the peak of their powers at 37, as you say, like a really key contributor for Lazio, who are doing really well in the league, fresh off beating Napoli just last week, well, twice, once midweek and once on the weekend. And he's just a really dependable, integral, important leader, squad player. And, I remember some of the goals he scored for Chelsea. And yeah, he's just a really, really good player.
Yeah, I mean, you speak about the period where he came through at his boy club Barcelona. The quality of players, especially in the forward positions they had, the fact that he's got over 300 appearances for that team in that era speaks volumes of him because, like you said, the talent there was incredible. I mean, during that time, 5 league titles, 3 Champions League titles, as well as many cup competitions. He also won the World Cup and the Euros with Spain. So when he headed to the Premier League and Chelsea, it seemed like even though I think he was 28 when he went to London to the Premier League, he didn't seem like he was in his prime. Like Chelsea was signing a winger in his prime. He kind of seemed like an experienced head. But again, he was fantastic for Chelsea. Just a consistent performer. Made over 200 appearances and had 69 goal contributions in that time, which is like one every 3 games, which is really impressive for a winger. And again, winning a couple of trophies with Chelsea as well and a Premier League. So it feels like he's kind of had that role of the experienced heads, in his teams for like quite a while now. But his stats and his leadership show this season as well that he isn't just that, and he actually is one of the main focal points for a team like Lazio. So, like you said, a really important game on the weekend in terms of the title race. I know we're only in December, but these games are key. And yeah, I kind of fancy Lazio, at home in the Stadio Olimpico, isn't it? The stadium they play in. I think it's going to be a tasty game. What do you reckon for that game? Do you have any little score prediction?
It's so difficult because I think Inter, I mean, in the Champions League have been phenomenal. And in the league, obviously last season speaks for itself. And I think the quality of player they have, they're set up. Inzaghi is such a fantastic coach. And it speaks volumes that they can be such an attacking powerhouse a lot of the time with obviously that three at the back and the likes of Dimarco thriving in that setup. Also, Turam, who's been a great acquisition for them. They've gone
Free
through,
signing as well.
adversities of the. Yeah, exactly that. And they're a very cleverly run club, and they're a club which makes the most of, that's what I love about Serie A as well. It makes the most of those players where it's like they're good players, but they're players who maybe haven't quite managed to make as big of a name for themselves in the Premier League. The likes of Henrik Mkhitaryan or Alexis Sanchez, who we spoke about a few weeks ago. And they just managed to find a way to make these really technical players, Hakan Calhanoglu's another one, absolutely thrive. And as for that game, I really do rate Inter, and I think they cannot be slept on at all under Inzaghi. I think they'll edge it 2-1, which is a very difficult one at Lazio as well.
Mm.
But I just think Inter have that extra firepower, that I don't want to say that know-how, so to speak, 'cause that feels a bit traditional. But I think they're a top side, and a really good one to watch. And Inzaghi's a top manager, as I say. Tuesday brings us onto a new category within In the Spotlight, and that is Hot Topic. We want to always be improving the series, adapting the series. So, as always, if you guys have any suggestions, then please let us know in the comments below or on any of our social channels. And one of the ways we're going about doing so is calling something called a Hot Topic, where we're basically talking about anything in the name, a hot topic in football, because there will be some days, particularly obviously in the international break side of things, where there aren't the most desirable of games, or there aren't really topics we want to be talking about when there's a lot of really topical footballing discussions. So please do let us know if you have any general hot topics you want us to discuss in the future, which is relevant in the world of football, or, we're all ears for multiple suggestions. But on to Tuesday, and I say it's hot topic like it's, a new subject in football, but it's actually talking about, well, Rochdale versus Tamworth, which the away side, they drew Junior's beloved Tottenham Hotspur in the FA Cup third round, which is a pretty amazing deal for them. Like, you look at those general FA Cup ties or cup ties, you think about if you have a home tie, then amazing. You get to welcome almost a proper big boy to a ground like Tamworth is a pretty special one. And, obviously the expensive players which might come with that. And then if it's an away game, it's the financial benefits. However, the smaller teams no longer have that replay in terms of talking about, the benefit of the financial side of things and the specialness, if you will, of the lower versus upper side games. Junior, what do you think about the fact that we no longer have replays? Obviously, a lot's been said about fixture congestion, and, it's sometimes even underappreciated in the lower leagues quite how congested the fixtures are. And, in the mainstream side of things, a lot of footballers have spoken about the general football congestion and how many fixtures and player welfare and whatnot. What is your opinion that one of the steps taken, if you will, to decide that is removing replays?
I think, as much as it pains me to say it, I think it is the right call. I think, unfortunately, like footballers, they just don't get a break these days. They play, 40, 50 games a season. They go, most of the times, even now with the Nations League, like they seem to have an international tournament every summer, and they just don't seem to have any time off. Like, hence why more players are getting more injuries because there's no rest time. And I've also, like the reason why they've gotten rid of replays, and a kind of another suggestion I've seen has been to get rid of the League Cup, because again it's more fixtures, and other nations, I think like France and I want to say Germany as well, have gotten rid of their like second cup, so they only have one cup competition. So it'll be interesting to see if England do go down that route as well. But in terms of the FA Cup, I do understand it because players need rest when they can get it, and the fixture that the third round onwards come in from the new year after we've just had a busy Christmas period, so replays don't make sense. But I just feel bad for those smaller teams, the teams that financially it's going to benefit them so much. You get a say an away fixture, you draw the game, you get them back to your home ground, you get some TV revenue in, you get, as you said, the ticket sales coming in, and just it's so big for the club, for the cities, and it just from a fan point of view, I love those replays. I love seeing these big teams go to these non-league clubs. Saying that on this fixture, I absolutely hate this fixture. I think I'd much rather have like a championship side away than Tamworth away. Honestly, I just it yeah, it's not one I'm looking forward to from a Tottenham point of view. But yeah, I understand why why they've made the decision. From a fan's point of view, it's a shame because as I said, I love seeing these replays, and it also I think the other day in the second round, I think um, can't remember the name of the team. It was a non-league team that played Reading, and I think they brought it back and they drew 3-3 away at Reading, and you think, okay, great, you have a replay, you take it back, you never know what could happen. But they went into extra time. Reading had the resources to bring on quality players, and they ended up scoring a couple of goals in extra time and win that game comfortably in the additional time. So it's unfortunate for the smaller teams. I feel like it's kind of a win for the bigger teams. But overall, yeah, I understand why they've done it. What are your thoughts, Matt?
It's difficult because I think, you mention the specialness of obviously, how going to that non-league side in terms of for that non-league side to have, a big side be welcome to their ground. For example, Man City when they played, I'm giving an example and I can't even remember the name, brilliant. A few years ago, they played, I think it was a League One or a League Two side away from home. And that's a pretty special thing for people to see or locals to see the likes of Kevin De Bruyne or Erling Haaland or whatever playing literally right in front of, in their stadium. And in the same vein, you then think, oh, okay, City have had an off day. You've held them to a replay. You're then going to the Etihad. Okay, you might get slightly walloped, but you get an unbelievable experience, and financially the benefits are almost endless.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you think about that, it's such a small amount of games. If you're talking about getting rid of the League Cup as well, so you mentioned that as well, it's difficult because somewhere something's got to give, right? Somewhere someone's got to be like, okay, this is too many games, or we're going to cut this short. But it's a difficult one. I think, as you say, it definitely benefits the big clubs a lot because I think substitutes and you have extra time and whatnot. That is the definition of what's going to benefit a big side. And I think there's always that special ability, in general, why people love the FA Cup so much, is it feels like there's that unique ability for a team to hold one of the huge sides, like a non-league side. West Ham, when they went to Kidderminster a few years ago, I believe it was, and I think they won in extra time. But it's the general principle of playing a side with just 4 or 5 leagues above you and making an unbelievable spectacle of things. And there's just something about the FA Cup where underdogs thrive. Obviously, we saw Coventry City were millimetres away from entering the final of the FA Cup last year. And yeah, it's a brilliant competition. And to answer the general perspective of, should replays be scrapped, is ultimately going to become very subjective, where if you feel you're a fan of a lower side, you're going to feel quite hard done by. And if you're a fan of a top side, you're going to feel, okay, well, this doesn't really make a difference to me.
So Wednesday takes us to France, the Ligue 1, where we've got a bit of a team focus, but a fun twist on it. Monaco host PSG, a battle of two of France's titans of the industry. PSG with 12 Ligue 1 titles, Monaco with 8. But what we're going to do with you today, Matt, is we're going to do another blind ranking. We love a blind ranking here and on the spot in the spotlight.
We do.
But what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 5 players that have played for Monaco, and I want you to rank them 5-1 based on how their career has gone since they left Monaco. So a lot of players go through Monaco in the early stages of their career, get big money moves. I want you to rank these players based on how their career has been since they left the French side. Sound good?
I have a feeling, it absolutely does, but I have a feeling you're probably going to go more left field with names than I first anticipated. So I'm looking forward to this.
We'll see. We'll see. We'll see. Okay, so the first name on my list is a 27-year-old Yuri Tillemans. Left Monaco in
Ooh.
2019 for Leicester for £37 million. And has had a pretty decent career since. Won the FA Cup with them, scored the goal in the final, actually, a really nice goal against Chelsea. But then was relegated with the Foxes, left on a free, went to Aston Villa, They made the top four last season, but he was in and out of the squad, and they're now playing Champions League football. So, initial thoughts on Tielemans' career and where you might rank him?
I feel like it's a bit of a nasty one to start off with. I think he's a very middle of the range type of one in this category. I think you're looking at a player who was deemed as one of Belgium's most exciting young talents at Anderlecht. And he hasn't exactly not been that, so to speak, as you mentioned, obviously in and out of the side at Villa. But I think he's actually developed really well at Villa under Unai Emery, become a pretty important player for themselves. And obviously, how highly he was rated at Leicester and, obviously the FA Cup goal and whatnot. I think you're looking at a comfy third here, and I know there's a lot of top names, but I think Yuri's a really, really good player. In another world, maybe he ended up at Arsenal instead of joining Aston Villa, well, a season before then. But yeah, I'll go with third there.
Okay, nice, good shout. I think he's a really solid player, Tielemans. Yeah, as you said, like a real quality player, a lot of talent. Part of that kind of that Belgian team that was in their prime a few years ago should have really won a trophy. So yeah, Tillemans goes in at third. Okay, playing it safe. I like that. Uh, the second name on my list is a 30-year-old Bernardo Silva. Won
Oh.
Liga with Monaco, which was their last title before heading to Man City for just over £40 million. Has won 6 Premier League titles, 2 FA Cups, 4 EFL trophies, a Champions League title as well in the treble winning season that was 22-23, and just one of those players that you just love watching the beautiful game. He's one of those players that makes it the beautiful game. So what are your thoughts?
You know what? The second I heard that name, I thought second 100% nailed on. But I actually think if you break it down and we're talking of impact since leaving Monaco, I think he's got to be first. I think there's a certain Frenchman which inevitably comes up, and it sounds crazy to say this, but if we're talking about since leaving Monaco, I think what Bernardo Silva's achieved, the accolades he's won, Champions Leagues, Premier League's been integral, how consistent he's been. He's been linked with moves away quite a lot, but he's never, quite left Man City, the likes of Barcelona or the likes of PSG. But he's always been at City. He's always been a mainstay. Maybe this season a few flaws are starting to show, but he's always been for me a player I've really enjoyed watching, a player I just completely admire, someone who is so good in tight spaces, unbelievable on the ball. His defensive work rate is brilliant. If you look at the player City signed from Monaco, you wouldn't really have envisioned that City would be signing this 8-10 hybrid who has played pretty much everywhere. I think he was even playing at fullback at one point.
Mm.
And, you're talking about a really adaptable, reliable player who has given so much to Man City. And I think actually almost whoever's on this list, unless if I'm forgetting someone humongous, which there's a decent chance, I'm going to go first place.
I rate that shout. It's a brave call. The second name in to put someone in first, but if it calls for it, it calls for it. And like you said, Bernardo Silva, he just gives that impression of just a manager's dream. Just never causes a fuss, never is a headache, can play anywhere. And yeah, I think it's a good shout. Six Premier League titles. The guy, yeah, he's done brilliantly since leaving Monaco. So okay, Bernardo Silva in at number one. That leaves second, fourth, and fifth available. The next player we're gonna bring in to this list, gonna go back a bit, gonna throw it back a little bit. I actually didn't realize this man played for Monaco until I did some research, but is John Arne Riise, the Norwegian left back. Joined Monaco in 1999, the first club he played for since leaving his home country, of Norway. Was there for a couple of years before got a big move to Liverpool. He was at Merseyside for 7 years, playing just under 350 times for Liverpool. 31 goals and 33 assists from left back is actually really impressive. And he had a rocket of a left foot. Please tell me you've seen the famous clip of Riise's free kick. I think is in pre-season in America, where the commentator's like, "Release the Kraken." Have you seen that clip?
It definitely brings memories for
Oh,
sure.
it's amazing, man! It's amazing. But yeah, John R. Reese is famous for that left foot. Won an FA Cup with Liverpool, won a League Cup, and of course was part of that incredible Champions League comeback in 2005. In 2005, where Liverpool came from 3-0 down to win on penalties against AC Milan. Did miss a penalty in the shootout, but ultimately wasn't costly. Since then, he's had spells at Roma and Fulham, and then went to Cyprus and India before returning home to Norway. So, Matt, your thoughts on John Arne Riise? I know it might be a little bit before your time.
It's really difficult. It all adds up now, before Junior was asking me about, we're not asking about John Arne Riise, but just seeing quite how familiar I was, and I was a bit perplexed. I was thinking, okay, so what player spotlight are we doing, or is it a celebration, or is it a trademark with his unbelievable free kicks? No, it's ex Monaco, which honestly, if you gave me a bunch of players or a list of players who could have played for Monaco, I would not have thought John Arne Riise would be on that list. It's so difficult, this, because it's fourth or fifth. He's definitely not going to be second here. It's fourth or fifth. That is tough. The thing is, I'm tempted to say fifth because I feel like if I say fourth and then it's second or fifth, it feels quite all or nothing type of thing.
Yeah, I get you.
But then fifth sounds harsh for a player, obviously.
Yeah, it's a tough one. Obviously, like all of these players are going to have some kind of success in their career since moving on from Monaco. That's the beauty of a blind ranking, right? I mean, won an FA Cup, won a Champions League, nearly 350 appearances. But you're cool.
I'll I don't quite think he can go second, but I'll put him fourth. I don't know enough about the player, so I apologise in advance that I'm not a super John Arne Riise fanboy. Um, I'll just be honest there. With talking about players I haven't watched tons of, I don't like to say too much, but I will go fourth.
Yep. Okay. The next player, the penultimate player on this list, is a 33-year-old James Rodriguez. Left Monaco in the summer of 2014 after lighting up the Brazilian World Cup. 6 goals and 2 assists for his nation, Colombia, as he led them to the quarterfinals. That earned him a whopping £62 million move to Los Blancos to Real Madrid. He had 3 years at Madrid, struggled to nail down a spot, and went on loan to Bayern Munich for a couple of years. Again, struggled at Munich. Had 1 year back in Madrid. Again, it just didn't really click for him, and he ended up leaving on a free to, yep, you guessed it, Everton, who were managed by Carlo Ancelotti. What a fever dream that is. Had an all right run in the Premier League, 6 goals in 23 games. He then went to Greece, back to Brazil, and he's now playing for Rayo Vallecano in La Liga. So, Matt, thoughts?
Oh, no. Last week, I think I was very happy with my selections. This week, I'm not. I think Yuri 100% goes to fifth. John Arne Riise probably goes to fourth. And then you've got James at third, and then the room for more than likely Mbappe, which, if we're talking about since leaving Monaco, obviously for France, that World Cup final was out of this world, and his goal-scoring record for PSG was pretty special, particularly early on. But in terms of actually what he's achieved, if you will, it's not been like completely significant.
All I'm going to say is don't
Because he was
assume you
still
know
at
the last player, because it might not be who you think it is. So you've got second and fifth left for James Rodriguez.
I feel like I've got to go second here because so tough. It is so tough because that Real Madrid spell was amazing, but he's not like lit. His longevity hasn't been like unbelievable. Obviously you mentioned that Everton cameo or that Everton short season. And then he's not quite been in the top 5 leagues since, which is completely fine. But he's 33 years of age. So if we're talking longevity, it's nothing that significant. Oh, this is hard. What would you do in my position out of interest?
I can't give any hints. I can't give any hints because I know the fifth player.
Oh,
so
you know the player.
my answer would be altered.
Oh yeah, of course. Actually, I can't ask. Oh, where's my phone a friend option at this point? All right,
you got second or fifth. Yeah, as you said, they're quite extreme positions.
Because if I say fifth, that just feels really disrespectful to James Rodriguez and the player
someone's got to be fifth, right?
Well, you know what? You go in fifth, James. Unlucky son.
Okay, James.
That's going to go so badly wrong. When you say like some random like Bakayoko or something in second.
So one position left. That is second, and the player that you're putting in there is a 31-year-old Fabinho. Moved to Liverpool in 2018. Had 5 years with the Reds, won the Premier League and the Champions League, as well as the FA Cup and League Cup. Ever present in club's midfield, making just under 220 appearances, and moved to Al Ittihad in 2023 in the Saudi Arabia rush of that summer, where loads of players went over to Saudi. So I think that's actually not bad. I think that's not a bad one that you've fallen on there.
You know what? I will happily take that because I was scared. Because my thought process was, if I say fifth there for James, and then it's a funny player in second, then it is what it is. Like it's amusing type of thing. If I go James second, and then you've got like Mbappe in fifth or something, because all in my head I had Mbappe or Berbatov or someone like
Yeah.
Bakayoko. That was kind of it. But Fabinho, I think if you're looking at Fabinho as what he achieved since leaving Monaco, you're looking at a player for about 4 years who was at the very top of their game, one of the very best in his position, versatile, such a reliable and trustworthy player for Klopp's Liverpool, and was such an integral way of the way they played. So I'm not too unhappy with that. I'd like to hear what people have got to say, because I think last week was maybe a bit more clear cut, or there wasn't too much controversy. This week, I think there's going to be a few people not too sure. I think Yuri Tillemans definitely goes to fifth, but other than that, I think the rest is relatively debatable.
Let us know your rankings in the comments below. So Thursday takes us to the Europa Conference League, where Chelsea host Shamrock Rovers. But we're going to be doing a player spotlight for today, where we're going to look at a player who played for both, rep the shirts of both teams, and that is Damien Duff, the tricky winger who played for Chelsea in the early 2000s, won a couple of Premier League titles with them. Just one of those players, again, kind of like we touched on Pedro earlier, who was a great winger in the Premier League. Probably has gone a bit underrated or a bit forgotten, but which part of a very strong Chelsea team, was always a solid performer when he played for them, and then ended his career with Shamrock Rovers. And yeah, just wanted to touch upon the fact that there's just a whole plethora of players that play in the Premier League that are like Duff, that are quality, but you forget about them, and that kind of category of players is something that we want to touch upon in this series, because we want those players to not be forgotten, And Damien Duff is definitely one of those, showing his quality with Chelsea, as we said, winning a couple of Premier League titles, and he's now made the transition into as a manager, and he's finding success. He's managing Shelbourne in the Irish Premier League, who have just won their first Irish title for 18 years. So he's obviously taken to management life quite well. And Matt, the question I want to ask you is, do you think some players transition easier than others into managers, or do you think some of them should just leave it alone? Because there have been some examples of some situations where top class players have retired, become managers, and it hasn't really worked out for them.
It's a good question. I think you look at what you need to be a top manager, and there's a lot of things. One of the things is, how can you get your ideas across? How can you come across to people? How can you stamp authority? How can you be a leader? How can, and that's not even looking at the tactical side of things. That's looking at the general fundamentals. And then there's stuff like talent ID, which doesn't really have to be something too factored in, because obviously you've got various other roles in the club, like sporting directors and whatnot, or head of recruitment, but there's still things to factor in. And I think, you have people who are incredibly smart and incredibly good footballers, but aren't players who can really translate that in a tactical or a coaching sense. And that might not be that they don't have the tactical ability to. That might just be the coming across the way that you view football, putting that across to a bunch of players who maybe don't have the full buy-in for yourself is difficult. And I think another really important part is also having the temperament to be a manager. You look at top managers, they've got to be quite calm, quite calculated. They've got to almost be able to feel trusted, feel like they can get their ideas across. And I think Mikel Arteta's a brilliant example of that. Xabi Alonso obviously doing really, really well. Zidane obviously a legend of the game and won back-to-back Champions Leagues at Real Madrid. And there are definitely examples of some top managers, and you're seeing a bit of a trend really of retired players turning into managers. And I think that's something which has happened for ages. It's just not something we've appreciated or known about because the likes of Pep Guardiola used to be a player. The likes of Julian Nagelsmann used to be a player, but, retired earlier on. And I think it's a growing trend. And there are multiple variables whether you make it as a manager, as we've seen. But it's equally something which is very prominent nowadays, comes down to multiple variables. And ultimately, once you retire from football, you've got a whole world of opportunities or different paths you can go down. So managerial or, a coaching side of things, that's a preference for a lot. Maybe a pundit is a preference for a lot. Maybe coming across to a younger audience or a general audience, not to a team of players and executing a game plan is more appealing. So I think a lot of it really comes down to the fact that you have a lot of roles in football and it all comes down to what someone's preference is and where their strengths lie in regard to communicating that to a group and gaining the respect from their players.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. The three managers that you mentioned, Alonso, Arteta, and Zidane. Funnily enough, they were all midfielders when they were playing their trade. So I wonder if there is like a common theme of midfielders who, arguably see the most of the ball, they see the most of the game. If they then become the best managers, let us know in the comments. Do you think that if there's a correlation there, and which players who have retired and become managers do you think have become the best managers and have adapted to those situations the best?
I think as well, just to very quickly add to, a lot of it isn't necessarily straight down to their management. It could be a really good manager or a really exciting young manager who just gets thrown into essentially the deep end where it's not just like a normal job. It's carrying across ideas to players who have been bought by 16 different managers. Obviously not 16, but you get the point. And sometimes it's going to be fortune when you break through. Obviously, Mikel Arteta, the best example. Arsenal stuck with him through a difficult time and through COVID, and they're very much reaping the rewards. So it is very much a case of right place, right time, as well as the quality and ability. As you say, from midfielders, I think the technical understanding they have of the game is paramount, and it's not surprising that they do thrive as managers.
So Friday takes us to the Bundesliga in a mouth-watering tie to kick us off for the weekend. RB Leipzig hosting Bayern Munich. Sorry, traveling to Bayern Munich. But we're going to do a bit of a fixture history actually in this one, where we're going to look at a fixture between these two, a reverse fixture, all the way back in 2017, 13th of May, towards the back end of the season, where these two played out a 9-goal thriller. And you could tell from minute one it was going to be goals galore as Marcel Sabitzer, just bursting onto the scene for Leipzig, scored a header crossed in from Philip Forsberg. The Swede, the lead didn't last long though. Lewandowski equalised from the penalty spot, which actually which meant that was his 150th Bundesliga goal. Obviously, an incredible striker, someone who just bagged goals continuously throughout his career. Leipzig would come back though, and Timo Werner, the man who was had an absolute electric season for Leipzig, he would give the host a 2-1 lead before Poulsen would give them a 3-1 lead into the second half, and it seemed like perhaps the game was out of reach for Munich, but they brought it back to 3-2. Thiago Alcantara with the goal, or Timo Werner would make it 4-2, and now you're thinking, okay, Leipzig have got their second 2-goal lead of the match. They'll see this one out. 84 minutes on the clock, it then turns to chaos. Munich get one back through Lewandowski's second of the game, and then as the clock ticks to 90, Munich get a free kick about 35 yards out, and David Alaba puts it top corner to score the 8th goal of the game. And it looks like Munich have snatched a point from this one, but it's not over there. 90 plus 5 minutes. Arjen Robben, the Dutch maestro, does what he does best, cuts in from the left inside the box, dinks over the keeper, and the Munich travelling fans go crazy as they see their team come from 4-2 down in the last 6 minutes to win 5-4. What a crazy game. Matt, firstly, the game itself, these two teams, they seem to always play out classics, but also games like that, that's why you love football, right? And Bundesliga, more so than any other league, seems to throw up high scoring matches.
It feels like the Bundesliga for a long time have always been like the team known as the High Line League. And it feels like because so many teams are recruiting either players or managers from the Bundesliga, the other leagues are almost following suit, particularly the Premier League. I think you look at a lot of teams in the Premier League nowadays, even the lower table sides, apologies, their football is very much Bundesliga styled, like quite a high pressing, maybe not in the or quite as an aggressive nature as like a Jurgen Klopp, but it's in a very aggressive nature and a very front-footed approach. And like you look at, as I say, the players, someone like Flecken, but Brentford signed from a Bundesliga club, Ortega from a Bundesliga club. Particularly in the keeper side of things, it's not a surprise to see teams sign players from these leagues because they're players who are used to having the ball high up or in unconventional areas, particularly as a defender or a keeper, because the games are almost so manic. And it feels like the other leagues are caught up to that, but the Bundesliga are almost the OGs for throwing up some pretty sensational games and game states which you wouldn't really associate with other games. So yeah, a brilliant game, and as you say, these two sides always seem to have something there, don't they?
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, I remember even last season they faced off in the Super Cup, which is the German equivalent of the Community Shield at the start of the season. And Leipzig won 3-0. It was in Munich Stadium as well. Danny Olmo scoring a hat trick, the man who always seems to perform. Obviously, then got a big money move to Barcelona. That was Harry Kane's first game. He came off the bench. I think he wasn't really fit, but they gave him like 10 minutes. But yeah, so Leipzig kind of seem to have their numbers sometimes Munich, but that one in particular, that famous day in 2017, Bayern Munich turned it around fully. And yeah, let us know in the comments which crazy Goalfest games are the ones that stick out in your mind.
Saturday brings us onto a player spotlight and to Selhurst Park, where Crystal Palace face Arsenal, a London derby. I mean, every game's a London derby in this league at this
Yeah,
stage.
honestly.
But a certain man who's rather well known in the punditry, in the footballing world, as a legend for Arsenal, but a cult hero for a number of London clubs, and one of those being Crystal Palace. The name is Ian Wright. And the first question I almost want to ask everyone watching and Junior, which we just want to quickly touch on, is what an underrated player Ian Wright was. Where does he roughly rank in your all-time Premier League strikers? I'm not asking for an exact number. I don't want to hear like 16th. I just want to hear like top 5, top 10, top 3, top 50, just a general number. What do you think? What do you think, Junior? Where does he rank?
I think you're right. I think he's certainly underrated. I mean, 113 Premier League goals. He was a clinical striker, especially in his days at Arsenal as well. I mean, I think for Palace, he was almost a goal every 2 games. For a side like Palace, it's really impressive. I mean, in terms of ranking, there are so many talented forwards that have been in the Premier League. You think of Shearer, Kane, Rooney, Aguero, Cole, just to name a few. I mean, I'd say he's top 15, top 15. I'd put him in.
Okay. Now onto a more specific to him, in my opinion, but more specific also to a certain other Englishman who hasn't had a similar career path, so to speak, but it's almost felt like his trajectory is the tiniest bit similar. You look at Ian Wright, where he was almost written off quite early on. When Arsenal signed him, it was, oh, why are we signing this player from Palace? Why are we signing this player who isn't really of the level or what we need? You know how quickly media and speculation and whatnot gets to players is Eddie Nketiah for me. And Eddie Nketiah isn't a player of the Ian Wright level. I'm not saying anything about that, but a career situation perspective, you're looking at a player who, after a few years, particularly after the back end of the 21-22 campaign, how he persisted in the 22-23 campaign with some key goals, particularly in Gabriel Jesus' absence and whatnot. It's a very difficult one to say, considering obviously he's now at Palace and it's not quite the same type of career trajectory, but he's struggling a tiny bit for goals, in that Palace side. He's maybe forcing things a tiny bit too much. Things aren't quite working for him. He also just picked up an injury. He's come back from it recently too. And obviously I'm sure he'll be relatively raring to go against his former club. Mateta, though, has got the knock on or over him at the minute. And the question I want to ask you, Junior, is what does Eddie Nketiah have to do, and where do you feel the best place for players who are struggling in front of goal or in general as a forward, where things just aren't quite happening for them at the minute in a goal return manner or a general game state manner? Where would you say is the best place for them to go from where they are now? Obviously, that's quite a general question because you've got a lot of strikers and there's a lot of different contexts. But players who go through a bit of a goal drought, where do you feel is the best place for them to go? Not as a club, that is. I've worded that like it's a club.
I think um, every player goes through a rough patch. It happens. I mean, you look at like Erling Haaland at the moment. Everyone, like, it looked like the man would never stop scoring, and all of a sudden, I don't know specifically his numbers, but I think he's maybe got one or two in the last 10 games, which for him is crazy. So everyone goes through their rough patches, and for Eddie, obviously, he probably never wanted to leave Arsenal because I think it's his boyhood club, but sometimes you have to make the moves that suit you and your career best. And when you go through a rough patch, I think especially as a striker, you can doubt yourself, you can second guess things, you overthink scenarios and situations. But the best thing to do is just keep doing what you're doing and things will turn because you haven't got into the situation you're in by luck. You would have gotten there through hard work, through your ability, and through your quality. So once one comes, we see it so many times. Once a goal comes, the relief lifts, the weight of the world is off their shoulders, and all of a sudden, two, three, four start coming. So just keep doing what you're doing, and the tides will turn. But you just got to keep working hard, keep getting yourself in those positions, and once you get one, even if it's like a little scrappy goal, then their confidence begins to rise. But I think in terms of sort of the comparison with Ian Wright, even though they're kind of having sort of different quality career paths, they both I know that Ian Wright had a lot of faced a lot of adversity in his early career. And now Nketiah is facing that in a different light, where he is getting maybe a lot of scrutiny for not scoring the goals that he should be. But I like the move to Palace. I think it's a good move for him. I've actually called out for Palace to bring in a number nine, like a younger number nine who's hungrier for quite a few years, but especially when they had that sort of attacking free of Eze, Elise, and Zaha. I just felt like they needed a number nine behind that. And they would have been cooking. Now a couple of them have gone, but I still think they have a quality team, and I think it will work for Nketiah at some point at Palace. So he just needs to stay patient, and I'm sure the goals will come.
Could you also argue as well that Palace's recent upturn in form could, be the key for Eddie? Obviously being a part of a side with a bit more confidence, things where things are going a lot better than they were. Obviously drawing at Man City recently or against Man City recently, getting the first win of the season against Spurs and have relatively kicked on since. Could it also be a case where I mentioned, sometimes it's not always the player's fault? Could it be a thing that we'll see Eddie Nketiah start to thrive? Obviously, Mateta is the main number nine, but also a win against Ipswich. Why can't that be that kickstart Eddie's Crystal Palace career? Football's obviously a very fickle game, and all it takes is one goal, as you say, or just from me watching Eddie Nketiah personally, I think he just needs to not be forcing things too much, and a player where he's got a really good all-round game. I really like a lot of what he offers, but it's just making sure that he's not letting, the goals or the adversity get to him because it's very, very easy to in this modern football world.
Yeah, well, look, we're coming into a busy Christmas period, right? And every team's going to need their whole squad available. There's going to be massive rotation because they're going to be playing 2 games a week. So it's going to be a great time for him to get involved in terms of, we spoke about his confidence, but like you said, Palace have got a bit of confidence now as well, and he is going to thrive off the players around him being confident as well. They're going to be more confident in their own abilities, which will just lead for chances for him as well. So it seems like a situation where they are growing. I think Glasner's done a good job there. He came in toward the back end of last season, did a really good job. They had a slow start this season. I think they've got quality players in that squad, and as we said, a busy Christmas period will mean that Nketiah should get plenty of minutes and plenty of opportunities to show why he is the striker that he is, and why he had the price tag that he did.
Seeing as we are just also talking about Crystal Palace Arsenal, quick one, Junior. Any chance for Crystal Palace? Arsenal have got the better of them on both of the last two occasions. Any chance of Crystal Palace providing a bit of an upset with their recent momentum?
It's a tough one. I mean, I think they play each other midweek that week as well. So I think they play each other in the Carabao Cup quarterfinals at the Emirates on Wednesday, I think. So they'll see
Correct.
each other, twice within a few days. So I feel like you don't, whenever two teams play each other twice in a week, I feel like it never just goes the same team both ways. Do you know what I mean? I feel like sometimes it goes one to one team and then the other fixture goes to the other. I think Palace away, obviously, like I know that it's a tough place to go, and they can create such a hostile atmosphere that the fans they have there, the atmosphere they have is fantastic. So I think it's going to be a tough place for Arsenal to go. They have been conceding some goals at late, but the way that Arsenal keep going as well, you wouldn't put 3 points past them.
Well, that brings us on to the final day of the week, Sunday, which is a player focus. And always there's some great football on a Sunday, but what we've chosen to speak about is Real Madrid Sevilla and a certain player you might remember called Sergio Ramos, who happened to play for both sides, most recently Sevilla, but also Sevilla in his younger days, and a truly imperious player for Real Madrid. And it got us thinking, what well, where does he place almost in the centre back side of things? Who are the best defenders currently in the world? Are they better than Sergio Ramos ever was? And you're looking at Sergio Ramos, I think you're talking about one of the greatest defenders to ever play the game. And obviously you've got the likes of Van Dijk, who I think is right up there, and I'm not going to speak about the likes of Beckenbauer or anyone of that ilk, because unless if Junior's been watching some football before his time, I don't quite think we'll be in a place to speak about him. But yeah, there's been some top footballers. He's right at the top of that list. And Junior, instantly, I'm just going to ask you, what about Sergio Ramos do you think is so special, and why he's had the longevity, the quality he has, even at the ripe age he is at in a footballing context?
Well, I think for Sergio Ramos, it's the fact that he keeps himself fit so much. The fact that it's kind of similar to when we touched on Jamie Vardy a couple of weeks ago, that he's a character in the sport that I feel like is dying out a little bit. You see, like whenever I seem to watch Real Madrid, he was always involved in some way or another, whether that was good or bad. And he was just, yeah, he was a big character in the game. I can imagine a big character in the dressing room as well. Obviously, wore the armband for many years, scored a lot of goals as well for Real Madrid. So just yeah, an absolute mainstay in the central defensive area, and one that's definitely up there. I mean, if you're talking current centre backs, yeah, up there with Van Dijk, Saliba, Marquinhos at PSG, even Bastonia maybe hasn't reached that level yet. I think Bastonia definitely will reach that level. I think he's one of the most promising centre backs in the world right now. And then obviously if we're stretching it back a little bit, like Ferdinand, Vidic, Cannavaro, Maldini. I mean, obviously the Italians were incredible at making defensive-based teams, and some of those centre backs they had in the 90s, early 2000s were brilliant. And then Carlos Puyol and Gerard Piqué as well, a couple of Spanish ones who won a World Cup and a couple of European titles as well. So I think he's definitely amongst some great names. How about yourself? Where are you ranking Sergio Ramos?
I just want to throw one other name within there as well.
Mm.
It almost links to, his Real Madrid partners, or the partners he's had at Real Madrid in relatively recent years. Obviously, he had Rafael Varane, who was sensational for Real Madrid and even for United, considering the state they've generally been in. He's not been at all bad and was really good, but for injuries. But once again, a bit of a recency bias, one with the Euros. But Pepe, what a player.
Oh yeah,
And I think,
class.
obviously, you mentioned the character about like a Ramos, and you could say the same for Pepe. But I think it's because almost it goes under the radar quite how good these guys are, particularly when you see them for their national teams. Quite how good they are, aside from any antics or any character side of things, which is very much needed in the game. And I think if you're talking about current defenders, obviously it's two separate questions, right? Like the general best ever and the current defenders. In terms of current, I think the Arsenal and the Liverpool duo are just so far clear of pretty much everybody. I think though the Liverpool duo have been Konate and Van Dijk have been, well, Van Dijk for me is honestly, I think from what I've watched, he's the best defender of all time from what I've watched. And
Wow, of
for
all time, that's a
Konate,
big call.
indeed, and for Konate, I think how good he has been this season, those two I think have been so integral to Liverpool's success. You know, I think he's overly rash or makes silly decisions, but when he's on it, he's literally a brick wall. You know, you can't pass him. You really can't, and he's such a mainstay in that Liverpool defence for a reason. And the Arsenal duo, as I say, I'm not going to say too much about them because once again, it's kind of stating the obvious. And if you wanted to talk about the best defenders in the world, you're not really going to be throwing out too many unconventional names, are you really? The Arsenal duo, the Liverpool duo, Antonio Rudiger, you know, since obviously leaving Roma for Chelsea and under Tuchel, how much he thrived in that free back, but how well he's done at Real Madrid, you know, watching the game against Atalanta the other night, some of the defensive work he did was unbelievable. Interceptions. Bastoni, I do think is right up there. I don't even think it's like a will be. I think he is just right up there. I think he's what 20. I think it's 25 because I remember there was a discussion about the best 25-year-old in world football, and yeah, I think he's brilliant. And the modern day defender now, you're talking about players with so many different responsibilities, you know, the ball playing side of things, obviously the defensive side of things, but how well they command a high line. And I feel like all those players are exactly the type of players who thrive and will thrive in that high line game state. And then of all time, as I said, I very briefly said, I think Van Dijk's the best ever. I just think people, you know, I think the only stick people used to beat him with was his prime. And we've seen how well he's done this season and last season, that it's not really a prime thing. It's a longevity thing more than just a prime thing. And you're dealing with a player who hits diagonals with complete ease, wins every aerial duel, defends so effortlessly, almost is, you know, I know people use the word aura or whatever, but like is genuinely really intimidating for players to play. And yeah, he's a complete joke of a player, and I've not really seen a defender as complete as him. And then Sergio Ramos, I think, is right up there in an all time sense. As you say, obviously, there's a lot of top names, but I won't really get into those.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's so many up there, and it's great to see, right? It's great to see so many young-ish centre backs that are already established in big teams like Saliba and Bastoni, but also some of the ones like Van Dijk, who was coming under a bit of pressure last season, but has found a second wind under Arne Slot this season, and as you said, has such a dominant physical presence about him that why wouldn't you want him in your team? So yeah, he's definitely probably the best in the world right now. Sergio Ramos, I think it would be top five for sure. I think he was absolute quality, Sergio Ramos. But let us know in the comments who do you think is the current best centre back in the world, and where would you rank Sergio Ramos? But that's going to do it for today's episode in the Spotlight. Already episode 3 done. Matt, thank you for joining us once again.
Always been an absolute pleasure.
And yeah, make sure to comment down below, subscribe to the Striver channel if you haven't already. Get your questions in if you have any subjects that you want us to touch upon next week. And we'll see you in the next episode of In the Spotlight.